Hey there, and welcome back to StoryHouse. Today, we will continue our tale of the nuclear bomb. In our last episode, we traced the first half of its genesis, from the groundbreaking theories of Einstein to the brilliant mind of Oppenheimer. The United States, recognizing the immense potential of this revolutionary weapon, poured vast resources into the Manhattan Project. Now let's go back to Europe in February 1945 at that time. The German army was on the verge of total collapse. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army had already occupied all of Poland, only 82 kilometers away from Berlin. On the Western Front, the British Army had crossed the Rhine River, attacking the industrial heartland of Germany, the Ruhr area. The American Army had taken Lorraine in the south. From any perspective, Nazi Germany was about to collapse. In February, the leaders of the Allied countries held a meeting in Yalta to discuss the post-war European and world order. Clearly, there was no longer a need to use the atomic bomb against Germany. Soon, the Soviet army surrounded Berlin. Hitler learned that the former fascist party leader Mussolini had been executed by Italian communist partisans. His body hung upside down in a public square. Hitler realized his end was imminent. The next day, Hitler ended his era of aggression. Afterward, the German army continued to fight until May, and Europe was liberated. The only ones probably not too happy about this were the Japanese. News of Hitler's death quickly spread across the world. The Japanese government announced the news on domestic radio, but did not lower the flag to half-mast in mourning because, in their view, Hitler's end was cowardly and not in line with the spirit of Bushido, as he did not fight to the death. The recently appointed Foreign Minister of Japan, Shigemitsu Mamoru, stated that Germany had betrayed the Tripartite Pact. The German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop replied regretfully that the German government was unable to fulfill its obligations as an ally. Now it was Japan's turn to make a decision. Would they continue to fight? Clearly, Japan planned to continue, as the Battle of Okinawa was still raging fiercely. Moreover, Japan did not seem to be about to surrender immediately. The Battle of Okinawa was the deadliest battle in the Pacific War, with over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and over 80,000 Allied casualties killed or captured. In addition, tens of thousands of local civilians were also killed. 3 months earlier, during the Battle of Iwo Jima, which took place on a tiny island, 6,000 American soldiers were killed and more injured. The casualty figures combined were even higher than those of the Japanese army. These losses forced the Americans to seriously consider whether they should invade Japan in the same way. General MacArthur said that the Japanese army probably had 5 to 6 million men and thousands of tons of explosives hidden in underground caves. Moreover, they were withdrawing troops from China to defend Japan. The landings alone could result in over 150,000 casualties, and the war would likely last at least 10 years. Of course, we know that the end of the war was just over 100 days away, but no one knew that at the time. The Americans had been preparing their war plan meticulously since half a year earlier and developed the invasion plan for Japan. The plan included landings in 6 locations in Japan, namely Kyushu, Shikoku, Hokuriku, and 3 locations in Kanto. At this point, one might question why they couldn't simply drop an atomic bomb on Japan instead of conducting a land invasion. This viewpoint reflects the advantage of hindsight. At that time, when the 3 Allied leaders met in Yalta, the U.S. couldn't be entirely sure that the atomic bomb would work. Large nations can't rely on luck, they have to be fully prepared. Therefore, the American war plan, of course, included a comprehensive plan for a land invasion. Now the question is, how difficult was it to invade Japan? 600 years ago, the Mongols would have told you that Japan was tough and hard to defeat. The Americans, having painfully accumulated experience from 30 months of island-hopping battles, were acutely aware of this. They estimated that the casualty count could reach 4 million men, including 500,000 dead, just for the battle on the Kanto Plain and in the cities from Tokyo to Yokohama. These figures are from an estimate by U.S. Secretary of War Stimson, which was formally submitted to the President. Because the estimated casualty figures were so staggering, the U.S. even pre-produced 500,000 Purple Heart medals, which are given to anyone wounded or killed while serving. Even though both the Soviet Union and China suffered over 10 million casualties in World War II, the U.S. was always extremely cautious about their soldiers' lives. The total number of American casualties during World War II was 1 million. By comparison, the estimated casualties of the land invasion of Japan were unbearable for the United States. Of course, these estimates were made under the premise that they didn't know about the atomic bomb. At that time, the atomic bomb was still top secret, and even the U.S. Military High Command did not know about this weapon. So, if the atomic bomb was not used, how would they fight against Japan? Let's take a look at the combat readiness of the U.S. military. During World War II, the U.S. produced 26 large aircraft carriers, 9 light aircraft carriers, over 100 escort aircraft carriers, 10 battleships, about 50 cruisers, and over 300 destroyers. Additionally, there were 200 submarines and tens of thousands of various landing craft, as well as civilian transport ships weighing millions of tons. These vessels were prepared not only for landing in Europe, but also to invade Japan's mainland. To ensure the defeat of Japan, President Roosevelt even promised significant political benefits, giving large portions of Eastern Europe and East Asia to the Soviet Union in exchange for Stalin's commitment to join the war against Japan 3 months after defeating Germany. Why such an exaggerated preparation? Japan had already been heavily bombed and its navy was defeated by the U.S. Japan's islands were nearly defenseless. However, the U.S. Department of Defense couldn't afford to think this way because crossing the sea to attack another large island was an extremely challenging task, similar to the hellish island campaigns they had experienced before. Japan was the only country, up until that time, that had never been occupied by an organized foreign military force. This record was created by its uniquely advantageous geographical conditions. The closest landmass to Japan's mainland, the Korean Peninsula, is 64 kilometers away, and crossing this distance is no easy feat. Comparatively, the English Channel in Europe is only 34 kilometers wide, and even at its peak during World War II, Nazi Germany didn't dare to cross it. Even if successfully landing on Japan's shores, one would encounter the mountainous terrain that had historically made it difficult for enemies to establish secure beachheads on the side facing the Japanese Sea. The coast along the Japanese Sea is unlike the plains of Normandy, France, and does not allow for the deployment of large military forces. Thus, the U.S. developed a strategy to attack Japan from 6 different locations simultaneously to divert the enemy's attention and reduce casualties. However, the situation became challenging, leading to high casualties. The Allies had absolute air superiority, but it wasn't as simple as conducting massive bombing raids and then sending soldiers to land. The Japanese forces would hide underground and wait for the enemy to approach before taking action. Hence, the U.S. chose landing points with fewer enemy forces and used the 6th location in Kanagawa Prefecture, Sagami Bay, as a feint attack to disperse the enemy's forces. The dispersal of forces is a major military taboo, and if it weren't for the anticipated brutal landing, why would the distant American forces split into 6 routes? They had no other choice. They didn't want to cause excessive casualties to their soldiers. These questions were originally placed on President Roosevelt's desk, but when it came time to act, there was a change in leadership. 11 days after Roosevelt's passing, Truman received a small note handed to him by Secretary of War Stimson. The note urgently requested a discussion on highly classified matters, emphasizing the importance of understanding this matter without further delay. Truman marked it on his to-do list for the very next day. He was truly surprised during the meeting, and then realized that this could be the ultimate solution to defeat Japan without risking the lives of possibly 500,000 American soldiers. The highly classified matter referred to was the Manhattan Project, originally initiated by Roosevelt and intended for him to make the final decision. Fate passed the button to Truman, a man whom most Americans barely knew a few years before. So, let's see how the Manhattan Project was progressing. The following day, Secretary Stimson walked into the Oval Office and handed Truman a brief, typewritten memorandum. Truman read it quietly, and the first sentence stated that our country will likely produce the most dreadful weapon in human history, a bomb capable of destroying an entire city. Some of the information had been declassified, and now we can read this top-secret memorandum. The memorandum briefly described the process of the United States and the United Kingdom's collaboration in developing this weapon. Some details were covered in the previous episode. The memorandum also informed Truman that the United States currently possessed all the resources and technology needed to manufacture and use this bomb, but it also warned that other countries could undoubtedly develop similar technology, such as the Soviet Union. As Truman pondered the significance of this message, Major General Leslie Groves entered the Oval Office through a backdoor underground passage. Having just read the memorandum, Truman had technical questions, but they were not the president's concerns. Nevertheless, more than half a century had passed, and much of the information was no longer classified, so let's hear what General Groves had to say. Initially, the project's personnel were scattered throughout the United States. Groves decided to centralize these experts in 3 locations, codenamed XY and W, with each site responsible for specific tasks. The least secretive was the X site, located in rural Tennessee, better known as Oak Ridge, responsible for producing weapon-grade uranium. In the beginning, this single facility was sufficient, but as the Manhattan Project expanded, the demand for this weapon grew beyond Oak Ridge's capacity. Thus, in September 1944, the W site appeared in Hanford, Washington. By working together, these 2 factories ensured an adequate supply of raw materials. Now, where should the atomic bomb be assembled and tested? Oppenheimer suggested Los Alamos, where he spent his childhood. Therefore, the Y site, known as the Weapons Research and Design Laboratory, was established in Los Alamos. After completing his briefing, Groves submitted a report to the president, opening with the development's purpose. Atomic bombs could hasten the end of the current war and save American lives and property. Why was this claim made? The bomb's power was equivalent to tens of thousands tons of TNT, theoretically capable of reaching 100,000 tons. Let me add something here. The little boy used in Hiroshima had an equivalent yield of 15,000 tons of TNT, while the fat man used in Nagasaki had an equivalent yield of 20,000 tons of TNT. What do these numbers mean? Truman, a former artilleryman in World War I and a veteran of the front lines in France, knew exactly what they meant. Truman asked Stimson and Groves a few questions, especially regarding the last one: how much longer until the atomic bomb could be deployed? The answer was 4 months. Hearing that, Truman firmly stated his support for the plan. Next, it's a big question: which Japanese cities should be the targets? This meeting of the Target Committee was held in Oppenheimer's modest office to discuss that. Everyone agreed that the first nuclear explosion had to be grand to demonstrate the weapon's power to the international community. Therefore, they chose a city that had not been previously bombed by conventional air raids, as it would have a more stunning impact. They identified 4 potential targets: Kyoto, the ancient capital of Japan with a population of 1 million, Hiroshima, with the largest Japanese army logistics base and main port for troop embarkation, Yokohama, an important industrial city that was still intact, and Kokura, with a local arsenal, producing light weapons, anti-aircraft weapons, and anti-landing equipment. After seeing the list, Secretary Stimson picked up a pen and crossed out Kyoto. He had visited Kyoto years ago, and had fond memories of it as a center of Japanese art and culture, so he eliminated it from the list. After hours of discussion and debate, they eventually agreed on Hiroshima as the best target for the first atomic bomb. By that time, the U.S. military knew that Hiroshima had a population of 300,000 civilians and about 40,000 military personnel, and it was the headquarters of the 2nd General Army Command of Japan, responsible for defending the region against any Allied invasion. This target had to be destroyed if the atomic bomb proved effective, which would be the ultimate test. Now is the time for the Trinity test, the world's first atomic bomb. In the desert of New Mexico, a 100-foot tall steel tower stood. The 4-ton nuclear weapon was armed and ready. It was July 16, 1945, 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was raining heavily. The command center decided they would proceed with the test as soon as the rain stopped. 6 miles away in the command center, Oppenheimer was waiting anxiously. The test should have happened earlier, but the heavy rain had caused a delay, and waiting was always nerve-wracking. In fact, the test should not have happened at all because the scientists were already sure that the plutonium bomb, like Little Boy, would definitely explode. There was no need to test it. However, they were uncertain about the uranium bomb, like Fat Man. The scientists wanted to use the test to validate whether the implosion design would work as planned. General Groves was against the test, saying that it was a waste of resources. Oppenheimer insisted that if they did not test the actual weapon, there would always be doubts about its effectiveness. Now that the bomb was ready and waiting to be tested, let's see how it turned out. Here, it's important to note that this argument was no trivial matter. The total cost of the nuclear test program was around $1 billion. If the test failed, it would mean wasting $1 billion, something no one wanted to see happen. At this moment, there was a young man named Hoenig on the platform. His task was to guard the billion-dollar bomb. Why did someone need to watch it? Because this type of weapon was too complex and was easily vulnerable to sabotage, so the atomic bomb couldn't be left unguarded at night. Oppenheimer assigned Hoenig to stay up all night and watch over the bomb, ensuring no one would tamper with it. Hoenig, being young, was the only scientist capable of climbing the high tower, which earned him the position to be assigned to this crucial task. Equipped with a telephone, a hanging lamp, a folding chair, and the book 10 Days on an Island, he wondered how he could defend against intruders using only a telephone or a storybook. As dawn approached, a thunderstorm broke out, and he began to worry whether the lightning might accidentally detonate the atomic bomb. Fortunately, the lightning ceased without incident. At 5:30 in the morning, the countdown began. Hoenig had his hand on the final switch, and Oppenheimer had given him one last task if anything unexpected happened. He was to press the abort switch, the only way to stop the nuclear test. However, nothing went wrong. The electrical pulse struck the detonator. Then, the atomic bomb was successfully detonated. The explosion's power was equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. The brightness of the blast could be seen from 200 miles away, and a mushroom cloud rose nearly 40,000 feet high. The heat vaporized the steel tower to a depth of 6 feet and over 1,000 feet in circumference, creating a massive crater. The detonation was so powerful that it kept Oppenheimer awake for 3 days. At that moment, he understood that the world had changed forever. The atomic age had begun. This was a monumental moment in human history, comparable to the discovery of fire in ancient times, unleashing a tremendous energy from within the atom that had never been seen before on Earth. Although the event lasted only a short time, it felt like eternity. With a broad smile, Groves asked Oppenheimer, "Are you proud of me now?" Oppenheimer, usually eloquent, was too excited to say much, and simply replied, "Thank you." Later, he mentioned that he was reminded of a phrase from Hindu scriptures, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Indeed, the consequences of such a bomb in Japanese cities were evident. Now, the final scene. Let's start from midnight on August 6th, 1945. At this time, There were still 7 hours until the dropping of the atomic bomb, little boy, on Hiroshima. The B-29, responsible for the bombing, had completed its inspection and was ready to take off, and all crew members were assembled and ready. However, as they walked onto the runway, they were stunned by the sight before them. The B-29, named Enola Gay, they were about to board, was bathed in the midnight searchlights. General Groves wanted to record this historic moment, so there were hundreds of photographers lined up neatly in front of the runway, creating a scene reminiscent of a Hollywood premiere. It seemed strange to have so many reporters, since it was a highly classified military mission. 5 minutes later, the photos were taken, and the plane was towed to the takeoff position. Amid cheers from the tower and the crowd on the runway, the plane lifted off and headed toward the dropping point of the atomic bomb. Worthwhile mentioning the B-29 Superfortress, a 4-engine heavy strategic bomber designed and produced by Boeing, and it was the aircraft used by the U.S. to launch air raids on Japanese cities. According to declassified information from the U.S. Department of Defense, the design and production of this aircraft cost a total of $3 billion, more than the $2 billion spent on the Manhattan Project, making it the most expensive project during World War II. 3 hours before dropping the bomb, the arming of the bomb had to take place. They had to remove the arming wire first. After that, they inserted the projectile and initiators into the bomb. Once done, they had to reconnect the arming wire, and then the bomb would be fully assembled. 50 minutes before dropping the bomb, the weather observation plane had flown to the target city. They sent a coded message. The cloud cover was less than 30%, suggesting good bombing conditions. 10 minutes before dropping the bomb, Enola Gay reached Hiroshima. Then 3 minutes before, the bomb release procedure started. The bombardier placed his left eye on the bomb site and aligned the target. 1 minute before dropping the bomb, Tibbets, the pilot, gave the final order to the entire crew. You can't turn back now. Now, the T-shaped AOE bridge was clearly visible below. The bomb bay doors opened, and the bombardier pushed the button to release the bomb. The bomb was dropped, and the little boy fell 6 miles in about 40 seconds. The bomb exploded at an altitude of 1890 feet above the town. At that moment, a flash came, brighter than the noonday sun. Everything changed at that instant. The Enola Gay was already 6 miles away at that time. Still, the shockwave from the explosion hit it hard. The aircraft shuddered and turned around, so everyone could witness the rising purple mushroom cloud reaching 45,000 feet. The landscape below was now devastated. The city was enveloped in black smoke and flames, like a boiling cauldron. This was how a New York Times reporter later described the scene. 16 hours later, in front of the White House, Assistant Press Secretary Eben Ayers read President Truman's statement. "Hours ago, we dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, bringing destruction to the enemy. The bomb's power was equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. The news spread, and the U.S. was in a frenzy. A few days later, a second atomic bomb Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki on August 9th. The devastating power unleashed by these atomic weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki left an indelible impact on the Japanese leadership and the entire nation, leading Emperor Hirohito to announce the surrender on August 15th, which was formally signed soon after. This marked the conclusion of one of the most catastrophic conflicts in human history and ushered in a new era with profound consequences for the world. As our story also comes to an end, I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.